14 days into this war, something happened that almost nobody noticed. There was no explosion, no missile strike, no dramatic footage on television, just a quiet move inside the global banking system, a move that may prove more dangerous than anything that has happened on the battlefield so far. Late Friday night, several Asian energy buyers began settling small shipments of Middle Eastern oil without using the US dollar. There was no announcement, no headlines, just quiet transactions moving through financial networks in Shanghai, Dubai, and Singapore. And the currency used for those trades was not dollars, it was Chinese yuan. On the surface, it sounds boring, just accounting, just paperwork. But if this trend grows, it strikes directly at the invisible structure that has held up American power for half a century. Because for 50 years, the global oil trade has revolved around a single rule. Oil is priced and traded in dollars, and that rule forces every country on earth to hold dollars whether they like the United States or not. To understand why this matters, you have to understand something that rarely gets explained clearly. The dollar is powerful not simply because America is rich or militarily strong. The dollar is powerful because the world needs it constantly, every single day. Countries must buy oil to keep their economies running. Factories, power plants, shipping, trucks, airplanes, all depend on it. And if oil is priced in dollars, then every country must hold dollars first before they can buy energy. That constant demand for dollars creates a financial engine that feeds the entire American system. It allows the United States government to borrow enormous amounts of money at low interest rates. It allows America to run trade deficits year after year without facing the same consequences that would crush other economies. And it allows Washington to finance a global military presence that stretches from Europe to Asia to the Middle East. In other words, the dollar is not just a currency. It is the operating system of the global economy, and oil is the program that forces everyone to keep using it. This system did not appear naturally. It was built deliberately in the 1970s, after the collapse of the gold standard. When the United States could no longer guarantee that dollars were backed by gold, Washington needed a new reason for the world to trust the currency. That reason became oil, through a strategic agreement. With Saudi Arabia and the wider OPEC alliance, oil would be sold in dollars, and the United States would provide security protection for the region. That agreement created the petrodollar system, a system so powerful that it locked the entire global energy market into dollar demand for decades. Every nation that wanted oil needed dollars first, and that meant central banks everywhere accumulated massive reserves of US currency, reinforcing American financial dominance year after year. But systems that dominate for too long always attract challengers, and over the last 20 years, several leaders tried to break away from dollar oil trading. Saddam Hussein experimented with selling Iraqi oil in euros. Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency for oil trade. Venezuela explored non-dollar settlements with China and Russia. None of those attempts succeeded, partly because the countries pushing them lacked the scale, leverage, and alliances required to challenge the system directly. Today, however, the geopolitical landscape looks very different. China is now the largest importer of oil in the world. It is also the second largest economy, and it has spent the past decade quietly building the infrastructure required to trade energy without using dollars. China launched yuan-denominated oil futures contracts in Shanghai, it established currency swap lines with dozens of countries, and it developed digital payment systems designed specifically to bypass Western financial networks. For years, these tools sat mostly unused, because most countries still preferred the safety and familiarity of dollar transactions. But wars have a way of accelerating changes that once seemed impossible. The current conflict in the Middle East has created exactly the kind of pressure that can reshape financial behavior. Because when shipping lanes are threatened and energy prices surge, governments stop worrying about tradition and start worrying about survival. Right now, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply normally passes through the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point that sits between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. When tensions rise in that corridor, global markets panic instantly, because any disruption there can remove millions of barrels of oil from circulation, almost overnight. In the past 2 weeks, insurance costs for tankers traveling through the region have skyrocketed. Several shipping companies have delayed voyages, and oil prices have surged sharply as traders fear potential blockages. This is where the financial shift becomes important, because when the flow of oil becomes uncertain, buyers begin searching for any reliable supply regardless of payment structure. And that is exactly where China has stepped in. Chinese energy companies have quietly increased purchases from sanctioned suppliers, including Iran, using payment systems denominated in yuan rather than dollars. The transactions are routed through regional financial hubs, and they are often settled through banks that operate outside the traditional Western-dominated clearing networks. On paper, these deals are small compared to the enormous scale of the global oil market, but their importance lies in what they represent. Each trade proves that oil can be bought and sold without touching the dollar system. Every successful settlement creates confidence for the next buyer, and every additional buyer increases the momentum of the alternative network. Financial systems rarely collapse suddenly. Instead, they erode gradually, as new habits replace old ones. For decades, the dollar dominated energy trade because there was simply no convenient alternative. But China has spent years constructing exactly that alternative. The Chinese cross-border interbank payment system offers a way to settle transactions without relying on the US-controlled SWIFT network. Digital yuan experiments provide faster cross-border transfers, and bilateral currency agreements allow trading partners to exchange goods without converting through dollars first. All of this infrastructure was built quietly without much attention from the public, but moments of geopolitical crisis can suddenly make these systems extremely attractive, especially for countries that want to avoid sanctions or reduce dependence on American financial oversight. For governments in Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Africa, the appeal is not ideological, it is practical. If a shipment of oil can be delivered faster or with fewer restrictions by paying in yuan, then some buyers will accept that arrangement regardless of the long-term political implications. This is what makes the current moment potentially transformative. For the first time, the push to diversify oil payments is not coming from isolated regimes. It is being supported by the world's largest energy importer, and it is facilitated by a growing financial ecosystem designed to support non-dollar trade. The United States still controls the dominant currency, and its financial institutions remain the backbone of global markets. But the emergence of parallel systems introduces competition where none previously existed, and competition slowly changes behavior. If energy traders discover that two payment routes exist, one through the dollar system and another through yuan networks, they may begin choosing whichever option is faster, cheaper, or less politically risky. That choice may start small, perhaps a handful of shipments here and there, but over time, those decisions accumulate. Markets run on precedent. Once traders see that a new method works reliably, they repeat it. Central banks then adjust reserves, corporations adjust contracts, and eventually what began as a workaround can become a standard practice. This is why economists and policymakers watch energy settlement data so closely, because changes in payment currency often reveal deeper shifts in global power. A world where oil trades increasingly in multiple currencies would look very different from the one we know today. Dollar demand would gradually decline, borrowing costs for the United States could rise, and Washington's ability to enforce sanctions through financial channels would weaken. None of this would happen overnight, and the dollar would not disappear from global trade anytime soon, but even a modest shift could have profound consequences over decades. For now, the battlefield headlines still focus on missiles, airstrikes, and troop movements. But beneath that visible conflict, a quieter contest is unfolding inside banks, exchanges, and payment networks. It is a contest over which currency will dominate the energy markets that power the global economy. History suggests that wars often accelerate financial transitions. The British pound lost its dominance after 2 world wars, exhausted the British economy, and opened the door for the rise of the American dollar. Today, analysts are asking whether the current era of geopolitical rivalry might trigger another gradual shift. China is positioning itself carefully, expanding financial influence without provoking a direct confrontation, while energy-hungry nations look for ways to secure supply in an unstable world. The question now is whether these scattered yuan oil trades remain temporary workarounds created by wartime pressure, or whether they evolve into the first bricks of a new global financial architecture. Because if enough countries begin buying energy without dollars, the petrodollar system that has defined global economics since the 1970s could slowly begin to loosen. Not collapse overnight, not vanish dramatically, but weaken step by step, transaction by transaction, until the world eventually realizes that the rules governing energy trade have quietly changed. And if that moment ever arrives, historians may look back at these weeks of conflict not as the start of a new war, but as the beginning of a financial shift that reshaped the balance of power in the global economy for generations to come.